Hey everybody, so this is where we left off from our previous video. We declared a variable, which is an object, and then we console log this out, which shows up right here in our browser. And then we used this, which is not ideal, as we discussed before. Now, the truth is that in our web pages, we're not going to have our data ready to use like this. So we're going to be using something called Fetch API. And if we have a look at the reference of what Fetch API is, it's basically it's an API that is promise based. So basically, what it means in a very, very short and not accurate way, it means that it will take some time to actually get ready. So it depends on the server that we're talking to. It depends on a couple of things, but basically is that's what it is. So we have here a quick example, quick and dirty example of a basic fetch request. It's really simple to set up, and this is the code that it's provided by MDN Web Docs. Voila. So this is what we get if we try to do this. Now, of course, this is not going to give us anything, but that's okay. We are not going to use a server. So here in between brackets, we have the server where we would need to make our request. Now, we're not going to use a server just for simplicity purposes. So I have a file here. Oh, actually, we're gonna create a file here that's gonna be called books.json, and this is where we are going to store the book details that we're gonna be bringing to our site. Now you can copy this from the repository. I'm just gonna copy paste this. So basically, what we have here, it's an array of books. Now each book is an object with different versions inside, an ID, a name, a price, image URL, a description, and an alt text. All of them have the same thing. Instead of using using an external server to do this, we're going to use our very same local host to do this. We're hosting this. Now, this doesn't work as a server. We cannot come and edit all these details from a front-end application because this is not a true server. But for this purposes, it'll work. So to access this file here that is called books.json, we simply need to do double dots /books.json. So now we should be able to have access to I'm just gonna do this for a second because I'm gonna comment this out. Otherwise, it's gonna throw errors in our console. Because I want to talk a little bit about this Fetch API. So we're bringing the data, and then we are waiting. That's why it says dot. Then usually we write this like that, but it's a little clearer. Yeah, the formatter will throw it in a new line, but it's the same thing. This is dot. Then we're gonna get the response, and after that, then we're gonna get the data from that response. It's a callback function that is being thrown. So we are going to be using response.json, which is gonna sort of translate this into the JSON format into a JavaScript format, and then we're gonna grab this data and we're gonna console the data out into our console, which is what we are getting right now here on the console. As you see, the main difference is, or one of the differences is that this has double quotes and this doesn't. So this is JavaScript object. This isn't. This is JSON, which is a little bit different. So we know that we have the data is in our site. The only problem with this is that if I, for example, here outside of this fetch scope, if I want to do console.log and I say data, or if I want to use the data for any reason, you see the site is going to say data is not defined. Interesting. So instead of doing this console log here, what we could do, I'll show you two ways of dealing with this. What we could do, I just added this curly brackets so I can jump into a new line. There we go. So I'm gonna delete this. So what we could do here is try to do a loop and deal with the data here. Now, again, we're doing this thing where we start writing code and it's all messy. It's not ideal. This is what I mean with this. So basically what we could do is copy this, throw it in here. And I've seen tutorials of people doing this. We could do data, for example, 0. And what I find about this is that the code is not very, it's not very neat. It's not very cool, I guess. So let's have a look at this. This book is not defined. Okay, I'm using still book here. Data, the first book from this data. Do that. So this is gonna give us sort of the same result. Now, again, we're doing this kind of coding, which is it's not very cool. So yeah, we should put this in a function, and then it'll be great to have access to this data because we might use it and we will use it later. So this data object is not accessible from outside. So whatever we do is gonna be locked in this scope. And it's just not ideal. It's not very neat. It's not very clean. So we need to find another way of doing this. So I'm gonna Control Z out of this. And that's good. All right, okay. So we have this. So what we should do is we should have a function that we could call whatever we want, but we can call, for example, get JSON, for example. You can call it whatever, again, you can call it whatever you want. And we can say console.log. As you can see, I like testing things before even beginning. Get JSON function ran 1 2 3, and I'm gonna call this function at the beginning of our script. So I say Control S, and we get this get or jet JSON function ran. So we know this is working. That's kind of cool. So I'm gonna bring all this code into this function. Instead of consoling stuff out, we're gonna run this. And we are kind of where we started, with the only difference is that now we separated functions. This part of the code where you can add stuff like that, whatever, you know, just to be as clear as possible, something like that. So this is the first function. This is gonna get, this is pretty much self-explanatory, but I'm just gonna add a quick comment saying gets the JSON, not all in capitals, gets the, oh sweet Jesus, gets the JSON data. Okay, cool. So we were saying that there's a cleaner and neater way of doing this, and we're gonna try and do that. Instead of using then, we could use something called await. It's async and await. So we're gonna say that this function works asynchronously, meaning it might take a minute, it will take a second, so we just need to wait just a little bit and put it here so we can make reference to this later. I'm just leaving this here to show you. That's the only reason why it's there. So this part here, we're gonna save it in a variable. We can call it whatever we want, but we can say let response. So what we are doing here is that we are defining a function that might take a second or 2 or 5, we don't know. And we're saying whatever it takes, doesn't matter how much it takes, once you get this data, we're gonna put it in a variable called response. And we're gonna wait for this until it's done. And then we're gonna say the data that this response is going to bring, because the response is going to bring headers, it's going to bring other stuff. But just the data is going to be a wait. Again, we're going to wait for this response.json. And this will translate, this response.json will translate this JSON format into a JavaScript object. And finally, here we can say something like console.log if you want data. And if we do that, we get the exact same thing. And the only reason that I left these two below is just to show you that this line here, it's pretty much the same part as this one here. Let data equals await response.json. That's what we're doing. And then we're doing this part where we say we declare the data as a callback function that we were waiting for. So basically what we are telling JavaScript is to wait, not to run before we get the response. We're waiting for the response to be completed. And then, for example, we're consoling out or whatever. Now, let me show you what happens if I do this, because we are declaring this data thing, this data variable. If we do console.log data, still data is not defined. So this can't be reached from outside the function. It looks a little better. It looks neater, I guess, but it's still not quite there, because it'll be great to have access to this data object, right? It'll be great because later, if we want to do this, or if we want to get whatever information from this data object, we might need it, and we are going to need it. So let me show you this real quick. Return something. You know, functions in JavaScript, they can return whatever. Return hello. So if instead of running this function, which is get JSON, we console.log and we console log the result of this return something function, that is going to return hello, this string hello. Now we can return whatever. We can return an array if you want of 1, 2, 3. I think you get the idea. Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add a string. Hello. So yeah, so we can return whatever we want, or an object for that matter. Something like name Martin and age 40. So when I console log this out just to see what this is made of, it says it gives me an object. So we can return whatever we want. So here, instead of saying console log data, we're going to say return data. Luckily, Emmett comes to the aid and knows that I wanted to return the data. So this getJSON function, what it's going to do is going to provide us with the data that we are so desperately trying to get. Now, if I still do this, console log data, look what happens. Data is not defined. Damn it! So it still doesn't know. Oh, I'm going to try to run the function up here. the data object is still not available in our global scope, in our global application. So to do that, let's talk about a little bit what global variables are. So we could define a global variable, for example, this one here. We could call this could be a constant, because this is not going to change. I don't know, JSON, or not, no, this is not JSON, this is the API URL. You can call it, again, whatever. When it comes to variables, you can call them whatever you want. So I'm just gonna declare this constant, this variable that is not going to change. That's why it's a constant, and I'm going to pass it on this fetch function. So that would still work, but the problem is that we still don't have access to this thing here. So this is what I'm going to do. Instead of trying to console log this out, I'm going to call this bring books or expose books. I was gonna call it expose books, but it's just too weird to call it that. And we're gonna say that this is an asynchronous function, so this might need to wait a little bit. And we're gonna say that JSON data is equal to await get JSON. So this is what we're doing. We're saying this function that is called bring books it's gonna be an asynchronous function. It's gonna be a function that is going to wait until this function gets done, is finished. So instead of calling the get function function here, we're going to be calling bring books. Now this bring books function is already defined as asynchronous, meaning it might need to wait a little bit and then it will call this function. And once this function is done, this will be stored in a variable. Now we can initiate this variable up here and set it equal to null. At the beginning it's set to null, and then later on in line 16 it will be set to the whatever times it takes for this function to run. So and then I'm going to say console.log JSON data. So if we do this, we see now that we have access to this data that we're bringing, that we are returning through the JSON data function. And through here we can call whatever function we want. So for example, I'm just gonna declare a function, say hello, I don't know, a regular function called say hello. And what this function is going to do, it could do whatever you want, but I'm just going to say console.log. And what are we going to log? Well, we're going to log precisely this data here. Now, how am I going to call this function? I'm going to call this once this is done. So look at this. We call this function, which is called bring books. Bring books knows that this is asynchronous, so it's going to store whatever data it brings in a variable, and once all this is done, this function is going to be called. And now if we refresh, we can see that we get all the same. Instead of consoling the data out, we could do this. let me see. We have now that, I'm going to open this up just a little bit, because here we were before in the previous video. I'm going to erase this now because we're actually going to use it. So we were saying that this was coming from a book, which was only one object. Now here we have an array of objects in the JSON data variable. So I'm going to say, for now, we're going to say put it in the 0. Use the first object of this array of objects called JSON data. So if we did this, check it out. So this one gets the JSON data. This function exposes the JSON data. Oh, that's cool. Exposes the JSON data in a global variable. This variable is called JSON data. That's the name of the variable. And then this one, instead of saying say hello, we're gonna call this populate HTML, because this is not saying hello anymore. And I'm gonna put this here. Just a quick note, in case you want to step a little further, here we can pass an argument which is going to be called callback function. Oh, if I can spell it right, callback. You can call it whatever you want. So this callback function is going to be executed. Now it's going to say that it's going to be executed once all this is done. And this is a callback function. And this function, which is called populate HTML, is passed as an argument of this function here. And that does exactly the same thing. So the callback, I'll repeat it. The callback function will wait until this is done. It'll wait. If it is 1 second, if it is 2 seconds, it doesn't matter. Now, if I hit F5, we see that it's immediate. But hold on, let me show you something. Let me show you what happens if I go to the network and we say disable cache. So that's not going to use whatever image is stored. And we're going to be saying that try to pretend that we are connected through a slow 3G internet connection. So I'm going to say F5 and look. It's going to take some time. Some more time. Look at the network down here. Some more time. Okay. There we go. So it doesn't matter how long it takes, how much time it takes. This will be executed. This callback function will wait and wait and wait until this is done. And once all this, the get JSON function and the get JSON function returns the data, and this data is stored in the JSON variable, the callback function will wait. If we look at this, we can tell that this is quite not right, because we're not gonna copy this. Imagine just copying this and then come here and say now this is gonna be equal to 1, something like that. How ridiculous this would be, right? Like to append this, and this would then be the second book, and then for the third book we copy it. That would be chaos. So instead of doing that, we're going to use a loop, of course. So we're going to take this JSON data and we're going to do a for each loop. Now a for each loop takes an element. Here you can call whatever you want, like item or element or whatever. In my case, I'm gonna call it book, because since it kind of makes sense that we are bringing books. So I'm just gonna comment this out. And for each of of the elements that are going to be brought from in this variable, I'm going to console.log the book. Boom. So I'm not populating anything for the moment. I'm just consoling stuff out. So this is the first element that it found. This is the second element that it found. This is the third element that it found. Now, if we console.log, for example, name, instead of showing this, it's going to show simply the name. So it found 6 books, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 6. Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, Grammar and Use, Think and Grow Rich, Public Speaking, Rich Dad and Poor Dad. So these are the books that it found on this file. Again, we're making this call from a file, not a server. Usually this would be a server, but that goes beyond the scope of this video. So all right, okay, so we know that we can get each element and each property of this element. If I say price, this is going to spit out all the prices here, which is great. And we also know that we need this kind of action here, this kind of thing that we have going on. So when it is, instead of saying equals, because if we do equal, that is going to rewrite the HTML here. It'll be useless. Even if I say Control S, that's going to rewrite the same thing over and over. That's not what we want. We want to add. So we say equals plus, and that right there, my friends, is going to run the same thing over and over again. Almost what we want, but not really. So instead of doing JSON data, we have access to this book thing. So we're going to say book dot image URL. Here it's book dot name, and here again it'll be book dot description and book dot alt text. All right, okay. So now we have all the books put together in our little site. We said that we were going to add a call for columns, because remember, all this makes part of a row div, and each of these should be a column. So kind of there, but not really. So we're going to say call 12 or call mid 6. So this is going to arrange things according to whatever the size of our screen is. So it'll try to make them fit. So if it fits, it will try to put them together. And if not, it'll stack them one on top of the other. However, I'm going to add a couple of CSS lines just to be a little bit more specific. First of all, I want to add some margin here to the top of the book, because I'm not a very fan of having this gap down here and no gap up there. So maybe to this class we can add a margin top, I don't know, 3. Yeah, I think that was the magic number. Yeah, it kind of, you see, it respects this space here and this space here. Looks kind of the same. Okay, so then there's this inline styling that we have going on here, which is not ideal. So I'm gonna delete that. Now the card is gonna go all the way, trying to get all the space from the page. So let's focus a little bit on the card itself. We're going to be using this. We're going to be targeting through CSS this class and this class right here. So let's go back to the index HTML. First one is regarding the card. So we're going to say that the cards should be a max width of 200 and align the items in the center. So that's going to make them look like that, which is not too bad. We're also going to say that the top image of each card is going to have a max width of 150 pixels. So it's not going to grow that much. I think it gets too big otherwise. And then to center stuff around, I'm going to target the card body. This could be done through Bootstrap's classes, but I just wrote the code. It was faster, I guess. And yeah, so that's some styling. So that makes it centered, and this will more or less try to put the same height for each of these columns. The sizes of these would not be so different. And last one is regarding the row, that the spacing of the cards is not ideal. So I'm just gonna say that justify content space around. So that's gonna make it so that when if it can make it fit in one page, it'll do. But as soon as we have 3 columns, it'll space them around horizontally. So yeah, hope that makes any sense. So all right, okay, it's just a little bit of styling. There we go. So if you look at the code now, it's a lot cleaner. So we have the functions part here, this function that gets the JSON data. This function here, it's the one in charge of waiting for the data and then exposing this as a JSON data object that is available globally. And then this one here, I'm just going to add a quick comment. It's in charge of populating for each book from the data object. It's not an object, so there are many objects inside this array. So yeah, I think this is a lot cleaner. I don't know what you guys think, but I think this is a lot cleaner the moment you arrive here. So I hope it makes kind of sense. And as we see, this is the result. Now, there's one more thing that we are going to do, which is every time that we hit here, we need to arrive to a new page that we're going to call book. Now this one page, let me put this here. This is going to be book.html. Now this one page will have all the information that we need about this specific book. Now the way we're going to do that is by getting the ID number, which is a unique number, this or string. So we're going to be passing this ID through the link. The way we're going to do this is by adding here a question mark. I'm going to say ID equals, and then we're going to use string interpolation to pass the book underscore ID. So if I roll over here, we see that this will try to take us to let me make this bigger. If you see the URL, we get the ID up here. I'm gonna go back, click on this one, we get a different ID, a different URL. So this URL is dynamically generated, and each one of these has a different link, or the end of the link is different. And we have this ID, this is called a parameter, that we are passing through each of these links. ID equals and all this. We're going to be grabbing this data in the next video and populating the one page that we just landed on with the information just about this book or whatever book we just clicked on. So I'll see you in the next one.